So we probably should stay, normally we just kind of chit chat or joke or try to joke at this point in the show. But I do just want to say before we start, today we're talking about a pretty serious topic. It has to do with Jeffrey Epstein, charges of, child prostitution, sex trafficking, some really triggering stuff, hypothetically. We're not going to get into detail about the allegations, but it's certainly going to come up. Mm-hmm. So, if you as a listener, don't want to hear about that, then this may be the one to skip, or if you have kids in the car.
Yeah, and we say this now instead of a chat at the top just to prepare you, and because it is going to involve some dark topics.
Yeah. So with that out of the way, it's time for Sound Politics. This is Sound Politics. I'm Scott Greenstone.
And I'm Paige Browning, sitting in for Libby Dankman this week.
It's good to have you on again, Paige. Thanks for coming.
This is a treat. Thanks for having me, especially on such a rich topic.
Yes, absolutely. Yeah, we have not talked a lot about the Epstein files on our show, but I think it is a defining picture of a lot of the politics we do talk about on here. Populist backlash against, rich elites, distrust of government, and just the political establishment more generally. I think it is a story that obviously has engulfed the other Washington, but it does, as we know now from recent weeks, recent files released, it has connections to this Washington, and we're going to talk about that today.
Yeah, and we thought that this would be a good week to discuss these topics and the files, because this week is when members of Congress began viewing the unredacted versions of the Justice Department's files on Jeffrey Epstein, the now dead sex offender who abused dozens of girls and young women, and he cultivated friendships with many, many, many rich and powerful people.
Yeah, people like former Prince Andrew, right, who lost his title because of his connection with Epstein. There are a ton of photos of former President Bill Clinton in the Epstein files released by the government. Democrats and Republicans are calling for Commerce Secretary Howard Lutnick to resign after he appeared in the files. All three of these men have denied wrongdoing.
And we have one person locally who's been looking at the files.
Looking at them.
Seattle Representative Pramila Jayapal, a Democrat, got her turn to view the documents just this Tuesday. Jayapal has been more and more vocal in calling for greater transparency into the government's handling of these investigations into Epstein, and got her chance to look this week.
Yeah, and we will also talk about later on the show Epstein in Seattle. He visited a number of times. He spent some time with a very famous Seattle resident or two who are named in the files. Now, it is important to note here that the appearance of a name in these files does not implicate a person in a crime, as we will hear from Congresswoman Jayapal. She believes, there's more investigation to do of some of these names. A lot of these files, though, they contain emails between Epstein and his associates. The emails themselves aren't necessarily evidence of wrongdoing. We should say, that before we start. We are going to talk about everything we just discussed on Sound Politics when we come back. And we are back with Sound Politics. So if you have managed somehow to avoid this story, or you've been following it so closely you kind of forgot how it started, Jeffrey Epstein, a New York financier, pled guilty in Florida in 2008 to state charges of soliciting prostitution with a minor. He received an infamously light sentence. It's often referred to as a sweetheart deal. But over a decade later, he was arrested and charged by the U.S. Justice Department in 2019 with sex trafficking minors. Epstein later died in his jail cell of an apparent suicide.
Yeah, and since his death, a political movement has grown over that time. It's built and built and built. A movement to release the Department of Justice's investigation and files related to Epstein. People believed that they'd contain compromising information about lots of really rich international figures and some domestic figures. And if you remember, Trump, in his bid for the White House in 2024, said he was going to release the files right away.
Yeah.
Instead, it took nearly a year. The Justice Department then finally released some 3 million documents in January. They contain emails, photos, videos, draft emails, and any member of the public can check them out. But many of these documents are heavily redacted. As we've all heard, the Justice Department said That was intended to protect the identities of dozens of Epstein victims. Okay.
Yeah.
But some victims' information and even nude images can be found throughout the files if you know how to look for them. And lots of information that was blacked out seems to have nothing to do with the victims. So something missing there. And I'll also mention, Scott, some lawmakers are now accusing the government of shielding wealthy, powerful Epstein associates whose names might be in the files. And there are millions of files left that probably won't be released because they're containing stuff that the government says is protected under attorney-client privilege or that they're classified, et cetera.
Right. This has become a sticking point with many in the right-wing coalition, I think, who wanted to see all the files released, unredacted, or at least only redacting victims' names. It's become, honestly, like a meme on the left, right? Honestly, recently, every time Trump does something distracting, even Minnesota, the Operation Metro Surge or whatever that has been sort of coinciding with all these huge protests in Minnesota, Democrats say, wow, the Epstein files must be really bad.
Oh, because there's a distraction all of a sudden.
Yeah, that's what they say, right? The pressure has gotten intense enough that the Justice Department agreed to let members of Congress view unredacted files, or supposedly unredacted. And that is why we are talking to Congresswoman Jayapal, who was supposedly going to be one of the first people outside of the administration to see files that aren't available to the public, to see names that aren't redacted. The government made these files available to members of Congress on several secure computers this week. Representative Jayapal is here with us now to talk about what she saw in her private viewing of the Epstein files and why the cases matter for residents of Washington state. Congresswoman, thank you for being here.
It's good to be with you as always.
So before we dive into the details of what you've learned, can you just give us your first impressions on looking at the files?
Well, I had just under 2 hours to look at them. There are millions of documents, and you actually have to go in and search. There's only 4 computers there, so you have to make an appointment to go. You're not allowed to stay for as long as you want. And you have to search the files with particular file numbers. So you have to know when you go in what you're looking for. You can search by keywords, but it's very, very time consuming because you may get a search that has 10,000 entries and you have to go through each one. So I barely got started, but I will tell you that I found many things that were redacted that shouldn't have been redacted and many things that were not redacted that should have been redacted. I also saw a number of files that were still redacted. We're supposed to be seeing everything unredacted, but basically what the Department of Justice did is they uploaded files from the FBI and other state attorney generals, and some of those files were still redacted. There were attachments that I couldn't see as well.
So just so we're clear, the things that should not be unredacted are sort of victims' names, I think you would say, right?
That's
and then
exactly
the things
right.
that should not be redacted in your mind are the names of some of these people who may be implicated.
That's exactly right. And that's what the law says. The Epstein Files Transparency Act, which we passed in Congress over, the objections of Donald Trump and Speaker Mike Johnson. We forced it to the floor. And then everyone did vote for it once we got it to the floor. But that was a lengthy process. But that law specifically says that you must redact the personal information of survivors, of victims, and you must not redact any other information of co-conspirators, predators, people who were involved in this massive sex trafficking ring. And so what I saw was the opposite of that. And that's what I asked Attorney General Bondi about yesterday. That's how I opened my questioning.
Congresswoman, we do want to talk more about what you gleaned from the files and what you read, but I also want to ask about the time that you were allotted. 3 million files would take a single person, months or years to go through. How long were you given to review all those documents, and are you going to be provided more time?
Well, we demanded the access. We were only given the access on Monday. I was flying on Monday, so the only day I had to review any documents before yesterday's hearing was Tuesday. And as I said, there's only four computers. They actually don't allow you to stay more than an hour, but I just happened to.
1 hour.
Yeah, but I just happened to get more than that because
Mm.
I happened to get there at a time when a computer was free. And so, like I said, it's really just the tip of the iceberg. And I am increasingly convinced that part of the reason that they gave us access 2 days before Attorney General Bondi came to testify is because they wanted to spy on us and see what documents we were actually looking up. And that is, in fact, what we found out yesterday is that there was a photograph taken by one of the reporters in the room of a printout that she had of my personal search history of the files. And that is just stunning to me that they were spying on us in that way.
This was you're referring to Attorney General Pam Bondi, who came to an oversight hearing yesterday, and we do want to ask you about that hearing. That's yesterday as we're recording this today, Thursday. Really quick, one more question, I think, about the files and what's in them before we talk about the Attorney General. Reporting from journalists who've been poring over the redacted documents for almost 2 weeks indicates that they are difficult to read. They're largely emails to, from Epstein to friends and acquaintances. They're often out of context. How did you know what to look for and how to interpret the files you looked at? What do you think that they tell us?
It's too hard to say, in detail exactly what's in the files because, like I said, there's so many, and you have to go in with specific document numbers. We knew because we had had our own people looking at some of the things that have been reported, so we had specific documents that we wanted to look at. You have to have the document number in order to search the files. And some of them were emails that were, particularly disturbing and troubling. One of them I put up was an email from Jeffrey Epstein to a redacted name that they eventually unredacted, who was a sultan and Jeffrey Epstein said, "I loved the torture video." That name was finally redacted, and that sultan has financial ties to Donald Trump and personal ties to Steve Bannon. And so, those are the kinds of things I was looking for. It will take us a long time to go through all these files, but it is clear to me that they did not, number one, they did not follow the law in what they were supposed to redact and what they were not supposed to redact. Number two, that there was intentionality, some degree of intentionality to what they did not redact. For example, one of the other emails that I put up was an email titled Epstein's Victim List. So clearly a list of victims that should have been protected. It was a list of 32 victims, and one of them was redacted, but the other 31 were not. That's not a mistake. That's intentional, I believe. And I believe it goes to the desire to perhaps intimidate survivors who speak up by saying that we will not protect your personal information. So very disturbing. And then the pattern of protection of predators and pedophiles who were involved in this.
Representative, I wanted to ask, as you are speaking about what you saw in the files and what others have seen, I want to point out that the emails show Epstein's high-level connections, but they do not contain proof of a trafficking ring. That's how it's been reported, that this is not showing proof of a trafficking ring. So far, there hasn't been enough evidence to charge any of the other individual men accused by Epstein victims. What's your takeaway on looking for a trafficking ring in these documents?
I think it's very difficult to say that there's no proof of a trafficking ring in here. I mean, there is so much evidence here. It looks like a massive cover up to me and I don't think it's of one political party, by the way. I think there are people of both political parties implicated in this. I think it is a scandal that is already bringing down ambassadors, perhaps even prime ministers, members of royal families around the world. But here in the United States, even though we have, top level people whose names are in these documents. And yes, it's true that we don't have confirmation of guilt, but where is the investigation? Where is the opening of investigations into these people? Because I'll tell you, I saw a lot of stuff in there that looks very incriminating and does absolutely smack of a global sex trafficking ring that was massive. And I've spoken directly to the survivors about this too. I believe that there are financial documents that will show that, but that there has been, a massive cover up. And I think we need to get to the truth of this. We need to get at the bottom of it, because if we don't hold these people accountable, I mean, look, some of these people that are named in here, and the emails are disgusting. I mean, some of the things I read, they're joking about pedophiles. They're joking about young girls as young as 9 and 10, raping and abusing them. It's abhorrent. And these people are at the top of academic institutions, financial institutions, government. They're in government. So to me, in talking to the survivors, this was one of the things that Jeffrey Epstein used to manipulate and groom these young girls. He showed them pictures of all his connections with all the wealthiest and most powerful men in the country, pictures of presidents, pictures of princes. So I think that there is, I mean, look, I haven't gone through all the documents, but it seems to me that there's plenty of information in here to start indictments, to start investigations, and to really make sure we get to the bottom of this cover up.
And the person who would do that is the Attorney General Pam Bondi, who you had a oversight hearing with yesterday. You mentioned she had a handout that appeared to show your search history through the Epstein files. There was a clash, a very public and very well reported on clash between you and the Attorney General, where she accused you of playing gutter politics. It seemed like you were sort of talking past each other. You were asking her to apologize to these victims for their names going out unredacted. She was saying, why didn't you push harder when Biden had these files, when his Department of Justice have these files? And I want to end with that question. You said that there are Democrats implicated in here too. What do you say to people who say you should have pushed harder, back when Biden was president, back when your party controlled the White House? What do you say to those folks?
Well, I did bring it up. I have brought it up multiple times, and I think every administration has accountability for this. I think the Biden administration certainly does, but I want to make it clear that Pam Bondi is the head of the DOJ that released this information without redacting the personal information of survivors and continue to redact the information of predators. And so she doesn't get to, we weren't talking past each other. That was my time. And she doesn't get to just say whatever she wants and attack me. That's the strategy she used in the Senate. We were not going to let her get away with it. I threw her, in my opinion, a softball. I gave her a chance to apologize to the survivors who were right behind her for the mistakes that the Department of Justice had made and the harm that they had caused to these survivors, which is substantial. And she chose not to do that. And I think it showed just how cruel and small-minded she is, and how she really had an audience of one yesterday. It was Donald Trump. And she is not acting as the people's lawyer, as the Attorney General is supposed to do. She is acting as Donald Trump's personal lawyer and turning the Department of Justice into a vengeance unit.
And we'll have to leave it there for today. Congressmember Pramila Jayapal represents Washington's 7th District. Thank you so much for being here.
Thank you both for having me.
So the Congresswoman had to run before we could ask. I really only had one other question for her. And honestly, I'm not sure if there's a good answer for it. This whole story concerns how we think about people, about powerful people,
Yep.
right, who had some association with Epstein. And when I think about this story, I think that the reason it's captured the whole political spectrum's attention, left, right, center, is it concerns powerful men and what we can know about them. And here in Seattle, arguably the most powerful one in the files is Bill Gates.
Yep.
Epstein visited Seattle at least 11 times between 2010 and 2016. He spent a day with Bill Gates and had, quote, monstrous fun, according to reporting at the Seattle Times. Gates, by the way, says he regrets his time with Jeffrey Epstein and has denied any crimes took place. There are some emails that Epstein might have sent to himself where he talked about getting medicine for Bill Gates for STIs, trying to hide them from, Bill's wife, Melinda. Bill has denied that, of course, vehemently.
His then wife, of course.
His then wife, now ex-wife, Melinda French Gates. I think, so many liberals in Seattle and worldwide have grown up thinking of Bill Gates as one of the best of the billionaires, right? For all his...
The good kind.
Right. The worldwide charity work, his extremely generous giving, the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation. I wonder how I wonder how you, Paige, you sort of think of him, how we all think of him and his legacy now, not, of course, knowing if any of these allegations are true, but what do we do with the things the Epstein files don't tell us?
Yeah, I am thinking about that, and I want to talk about, what this means for Gates and what they don't tell us. But I also want to mention, Scott, Gates is not the only Seattle name or even the only Microsoft name who appears in the files.
Right. Yeah.
Nathan Myhrvold is also in the latest batch of files released by the Justice Department. He's a former chief technology officer at Microsoft. Alex Halverson from the Seattle Times, a journalist, spoke with KUOW's Kim Malcolm about the relationship between Myhrvold and Epstein.
What really stood out to me is they're very chummy in tone, and there's references, specifically when it's emails between Myhrvold and Epstein, not involving their assistants or anybody who works for them. They're using language that is sexually explicit in a very jokey manner.
And there are also a handful of references to other Seattle area institutions in these files. But what is striking to me, at least about the Bill Gates stuff, is that, like you said, Scott, he was really seen as this model billionaire, like an example of how that the ultra rich could be good guys, could be philanthropic, could be world power players for good, a change leader in the health sphere.
Yeah, he again, we should say, founded one of the biggest charitable foundations in the world. He is planning to give away the majority of his wealth to social causes, and he vowed to reduce childhood mortality across the world.
Yeah, and now that his name is coming up in the Epstein files, it's a question to me about, it seems like his reputation could be tarnished to some level. I had been wondering about how much are people really connecting Gates to Epstein now, but then I saw at the Super Bowl, Patriots fans, Boston fans, holding signs on the screen saying Bill Gates is from Seattle, as a diss. So that told me something has gotten into popular culture, into the zeitgeist. And an artist in Las Vegas put up a pre-Super Bowl display on a building talking about protecting pedophiles. And Bill Gates and Donald Trump were on there, projected onto a building associated with him. And I should say, as far as we know, there are no direct allegations against Bill Gates. There are inferences to what might have occurred in these files. So, this artistic rendition was possibly just that. But the point is, his name has broken through in a more negative way than I've seen. So that question for me is, okay, the reputational harm for them, but then also thinking about the victims, because the damage is already done for them.
Yes, yeah.
Their supporters and a lot of the general public, and then politicians like Jayapal, as we heard, are insisting on justice for them because the victims have already lived with this harm for years.
Yeah, I keep thinking about, something the Congresswoman said after we did our interview, before she jumped off the phone. Let's just play that clip.
It has implications for survivors of violence and assault across the world. And what I saw in those files is, the emails and the joking. And I do think it's been a cover up across administrations. And I raised it, I've raised it before, but Donald Trump is the one who made it into a political issue during his campaign. And so that's part of what brought attention to it. That probably should have been there long before. But now that we know about it, we can't close our eyes to it.
That is really sticking with me, aside from, all the political theater or alleged political theater or gutter politics. Just like, we cannot now close our eyes to this, even if we maybe should have started paying attention sooner.
And that's it for Sound Politics. I'm Paige Browning. Our editor is Kat Smith. Our producer is Hans Anderson.
And I'm Scott Greenstone. And this show is only possible because of your support. Please consider a donation at kuow.org/politics. Thank you so much. We will see you next week.